Welcome back to the deep dive. For today's deep dive, you've given us some really interesting excerpts from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money to unpack.
Oh,
Looks like you're really interested in getting to the heart of the often overlooked human side of finance. And I gotta say, that's a fantastic instinct
yeah.
because let's be honest, it's not always about crunching numbers or mastering complex algorithms.
Right.
Sometimes it's about understanding the stories we tell ourselves about money, those narratives that can lead us to some truly brilliant decisions. Or to some real head scratchers, am I right?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
House's book is like a treasure chest filled with these aha moments where he uses real-life stories and historical examples to shine a light on how our emotions, biases, and even our personal experiences shape the way we think about and handle money.
Mm.
And what I find so captivating is how he weaves these stories together to make even complex concepts relatable and memorable.
Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the first things that really struck me was Housel's point that when it comes to money, no one's crazy.
Yeah.
He argues that there's no such thing as a universally right way to approach finances because everyone's decisions are colored by their unique life experiences. He even shares anecdotes from his time as a valet, observing people buying flashy cars, not necessarily for the joy of driving, but to try and impress others, often with little success.
Those valet stories are so insightful, aren't they? They
Mhm.
really highlight how our personal experiences become our financial lens, shaping our perception of risk and reward.
Yeah.
Think about it. Someone who lived through the Great Depression might view investing very differently from someone who grew up during the dot-com boom, even if they have the same level of financial literacy. It's those lived experiences, not just our IQ or education, that form the foundation of how we approach money.
That's such a crucial point. It's like he's urging us to step back and understand the why behind people's financial choices, not just the what.
Right. Absolutely. And this leads perfectly into his discussion of luck and risk, which I think is one of the most thought-provoking parts of the book.
Yeah.
He tells the story of Bill Gates and how attending Lakeside School, one of the few with a computer back then, played a massive role in his journey. It's a powerful example of how luck can intersect with even the most impressive success stories.
That's the story that really got me thinking. Because it's not just about dumb luck, is it?
Right.
It's about Kate's being in the right place at the right time, but also having the passion and the drive to seize that opportunity when it arose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Housel uses the Bill Gates story as a springboard to explore how interwoven luck and risk really are. It's like they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
He dives deeper into this with the story of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the railroad tycoon. Vanderbilt was incredibly successful, but also incredibly ruthless, often bending or even breaking rules to amass his wealth.
Oh, wow.
It highlights how that line between bold risk-taking and recklessness can sometimes become blurry.
It makes you wonder, how much control do we actually have over our financial destinies? Sure, we can make smart choices and work hard, but sometimes it feels like a coin flip, doesn't it? Bold risks can lead to fortune, but they can also lead to ruin.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Recognizing the role of luck and risk in our lives can be both unsettling and liberating. On one hand, it reminds us that we can't control everything.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it encourages us to be less judgmental of both our own financial wins and losses, as well as those of others. It allows for more nuanced perspective on financial outcomes.
I love that perspective. It's about embracing the uncertainty and focusing on what we can control, right? But even when we try to be level-headed about money, it can feel like we're battling against our own internal wiring, especially when it comes to that age-old struggle of wanting more. Housel dives into this so well with the stories of Rajat Gupta and Jesse Livermore, both of whom achieved incredible wealth but ultimately lost it all.
Their stories are like cautionary tales whispered across time, aren't they? They remind us that even when we achieve a level of financial success that most people only dream of, that human desire for more can be incredibly powerful, even dangerous.
Wow.
Gupta, even with a net worth of over $100 million, risked it all trying to break into the exclusive billionaire circle.
Oh, gosh.
And Livermore, despite making a fortune by betting against the 1929 crash, ultimately fell victim to the same speculative urges that had made him rich.
It's like that classic saying, it's harder to stay rich than it is to get rich. It makes you think about the whole idea of defining enough for yourself, even if you're not dealing with millions of dollars. What are your true goals? How much is actually enough to bring you genuine security and happiness without pushing you to take unnecessary risks?
Those are such important questions for all of us to consider, regardless of our current net worth. What does enough look like for you? It's crucial to define this because if we're constantly chasing a moving target, that feeling of never having enough can drive us to make impulsive or even reckless decisions, even if we achieve a level of wealth that others might envy.
It's like we're on a treadmill, always driving for more, but never quite reaching that point of satisfaction.
Right, exactly. And that's where the concept of compounding comes into play, which Housel illustrates so beautifully in the book.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
He uses those incredible examples like imagining how wealthy Jim Simons, the hedge fund legend, would be if he had started investing just a few years earlier.
Right.
And then he compares compounding to the formation of ice ages, showing how seemingly small changes over time can lead to dramatic, almost unimaginable results.
Housel's point is that when it comes to building wealth, patience and long-term thinking are your greatest allies. It's like planting an oak tree.
Okay.
It might take years to see substantial growth, but with consistent nurturing and time, the results can be absolutely awe-inspiring.
But here's the thing. We live in a world obsessed with instant gratification.
Right.
It's everywhere we look, from social media to online shopping. Everything is designed to give us that quick hit of dopamine. So how do we reconcile that with the slow and steady nature of compounding? It feels like we're constantly battling against our own wiring.
That's where discipline and a clear vision for your financial future become absolutely essential. It's about understanding that sometimes sacrificing a little bit of immediate pleasure can pave the way for a much greater sense of financial freedom and security down the road.
It's like choosing to eat healthy and exercise regularly.
Yeah.
It might not be the most exciting thing in the moment, but over time, those small, consistent choices lead to a healthier, stronger you.
Right, exactly. And in the financial realm, those consistent choices are all about building that invisible wealth that Housel talks about.
Okay.
He shares the incredible story of Ronald Reed, the janitor, who quietly amassed millions through saving and investing, living a modest life and staying completely under the radar.
Wow.
It really drives home the point that building wealth is often less about flashy displays of spending and more about the quiet, consistent discipline of saving and investing.
You know, it's funny. We often hear these stories of overnight success in the financial world, but they're usually just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There are years of hard work, smart choices, and often a good dose of luck beneath the surface.
You're absolutely right. And he also compares building wealth to losing weight. The focus should always be on the process, on building those consistent habits of saving and investing, rather than obsessing over immediate results.
Okay.
It's like putting on those running shoes and hitting the pavement day after day, even when you don't see the number on the scale budge right away. Those consistent actions over time are what lead to lasting change.
Okay, so practically speaking, what are some concrete steps we can take to cultivate those habits? Housel argues that saving money is one of the most powerful, yet often overlooked aspects of building wealth.
He compares saving to the energy crisis of the 1970s. Just as focusing on energy efficiency proved more impactful than frantically searching for new oil reserves, emphasizing your savings rate can be far more critical than chasing high investment returns.
He's basically saying it's not just about how much money you earn, but how much you keep, right? And this feels particularly relevant in today's world where everything is getting more expensive and wages aren't always keeping up.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Okay.
Housel argues that in a hyper-competitive, globalized economy where skills can become outdated overnight, flexibility becomes a key differentiator. And that flexibility is often directly tied to your savings. Having a financial cushion gives you the freedom to take career risks, to invest in learning new skills, to pivot when needed, and to pursue opportunities that truly align with your passions, rather than being forced to chase the highest paycheck out of necessity.
So it's not just about financial security, it's about career freedom and having more options in life.
Right.
It's about buying yourself the time and space to make choices that resonate with your values and goals, not just the demands of the market.
Precisely. And this leads to another crucial point that Housel makes: the importance of striking a balance between being reasonable and being rational when it comes to your finances.
You know, I have to admit, this is one of the concepts I initially struggled with a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Can you break down this whole reasonable versus rational idea? Because at first glance, they seem like the same thing.
I get that. It's a common misconception. Housel uses the fascinating story of Julius Wagner-Jauregg, the doctor who won a Nobel Prize, for treating syphilis by intentionally inducing fever in his patients, to illustrate this point. Now, on the surface, that sounds crazy, right? Inducing a fever, which is generally seen as a negative thing to treat a serious illness, it seems completely irrational. But as Wagner-Jauregg discovered, sometimes fevers can actually help the body fight off infections. So in that specific context, inducing a fever, though unconventional, was the most effective treatment.
Okay, so in that case, what seemed irrational was actually the right call.
Right.
But how does this apply to our financial decisions? I'm still not quite seeing the connection.
The takeaway is that sometimes the most rational financial decision on paper, the one that makes perfect sense from a purely mathematical standpoint, might not actually be the best choice for your individual circumstances and personality. Sometimes allowing for some emotion, some intuition, some flexibility can actually lead to better long-term outcomes. For instance, maybe paying off your mortgage early brings you a huge sense of peace of mind and security, even if it means temporarily sacrificing some potential investment returns. Or maybe you choose to invest in companies that align with your values, even if they don't have the highest projected growth rates.
So it's like saying that sometimes being a little bit irrational can actually be the most reasonable path to achieving your financial goals, especially if it helps you sleep better at night and stick with your plan through thick and thin.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not just spreadsheets. We're human beings with emotions, fears, dreams,
Yeah.
and those emotions play a huge role in how we manage money.
That's such a great reminder. Sometimes we can get so caught up in trying to be perfectly rational that we forget to factor in our own humanness, those gut feelings and anxieties that can derail even the most meticulously crafted financial plan.
And acknowledging that human side of ourselves can lead to a more sustainable and ultimately more successful approach to personal finance.
Okay, so we've talked about the impact of our individual experiences, the power of compounding, the importance of saving, and this idea of balancing being reasonable with being rational. But what about the role of history in our financial decision making? Housel seems to push back against the idea that we can predict the future based on what's happened in the past, particularly when it comes to the financial markets.
You're picking up on a very subtle but important point that Housel makes. The past is not always a reliable predictor of the future. He calls this the historians as prophets fallacy. While studying history is valuable, it's crucial to recognize that innovation, technological advancements, and structural changes like the rise of 401ks or the emergence of entirely new industries can completely disrupt past trends, rendering them useless as crystal balls for predicting the future.
It's like saying that just because something worked in the past doesn't guarantee it'll work again in the future, right? So how do we navigate that inherent unpredictability? How do we make sound financial plans when the ground beneath our feet is constantly shifting?
That's where Housel's concept of room for error comes in.
Okay.
He suggests building buffers into your financial strategy to account for the unexpected twists and turns that life inevitably throws our way.
This is another concept that really resonated with me. He uses those vivid examples like the German tanks in World War II being defeated not by enemy fire, but by tiny mice that chewed through their wiring.
That example is so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those tanks were marvels of engineering, meticulously designed, but they were ultimately vulnerable to something seemingly insignificant. The lesson is that even the most meticulously laid plans can be derailed by unforeseen events. So building in that room for error is all about creating a margin of safety, a cushion to absorb those unexpected shocks.
So it's not about being overly cautious or pessimistic. It's about acknowledging that we simply can't predict everything and preparing for those inevitable surprises, both good and bad.
Exactly. And room for error can manifest in a variety of ways. It could mean saving more than you think you'll need for retirement, maintaining a larger emergency fund than you think you might need, or avoiding excessive leverage that could wipe you out if things go south.
It's like having a safety net, right?
Yeah.
It allows you to take calculated risks without putting your entire financial well-being in jeopardy.
Exactly. And remember, room for error applies not just to your finances, but also to your lifestyle choices.
How so? I'm curious to hear more about that.
It's about avoiding locking yourself into a lifestyle that requires you to maintain a certain income level just to stay afloat. It's about building in some flexibility so you can adapt to changing circumstances, whether it's an unexpected job loss, a health crisis, or simply a shift in your priorities.
So it's about building resilience into your life, both financially and emotionally.
Precisely. And this ties into another crucial point that Housel makes: the need to acknowledge that you're not a static being. You'll change. Your goals, desires, risk tolerance, and even your values will likely evolve over time. So it's important to avoid making extreme financial decisions that could be difficult or even impossible to reverse later on.
So those all-in bets that we sometimes hear about where people put everything on the line for a single investment, those are probably not the best approach for most of us.
Right. That's a very insightful observation. It's about creating a financial strategy that can adapt and grow alongside you, acknowledging that your financial needs and priorities will likely shift as you move through different phases of life.
It's about embracing the journey, not just focusing on the destination.
Exactly. And speaking of journeys, let's dive into Housel's exploration of appealing fictions, those captivating narratives that can sometimes lead us astray, especially when it comes to making financial decisions.
Okay, let's unpack those.
Okay.
What exactly are appealing fictions, and how do they impact our financial choices?
Housel describes them as the stories we tell ourselves, often unconsciously, to make sense of a complex and often unpredictable world. He uses the powerful example of Ali Hajaji, a Yemeni father who, desperate to cure his sick son, turned to a dangerous folk remedy.
Wow.
This story highlights how, when the stakes are high and information is scarce, we can become vulnerable to believing things that, in hindsight, seem absurd.
It's like when you're facing a difficult problem, you're so desperate for a solution that you'll cling to any glimmer of hope, even if it's based on flimsy evidence or wishful thinking.
Exactly. And this same dynamic can play out in the world of finance, especially when we're dealing with the powerful emotions of fear and greed. When we're desperate to achieve financial security, to retire early, or to make a quick fortune, we can become susceptible to believing narratives that are too good to be true. We might ignore red flags, downplay risks, and convince ourselves that we've stumbled upon a secret formula for success.
So those appealing fictions prey on our vulnerabilities, our desire for easy solutions and quick wins, especially when we're feeling anxious or uncertain about our financial future.
Precisely. And this highlights the importance of cultivating a healthy dose of skepticism, of doing your due diligence, and of seeking advice from trustworthy sources who have your best interests at heart, not just their own commissions in mind.
It's about stepping back from the hype, taking a deep breath, and evaluating financial claims with a critical eye rather than blindly believing what sounds good or promises the moon.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about becoming a savvy consumer of financial information, discerning fact from fiction, and recognizing that there are rarely any shortcuts to building lasting wealth.
And this brings us to a part of the book that I found particularly refreshing. Howell's willingness to share his own approach to managing money. It's like he's pulling back the curtain and giving us a glimpse into his own financial philosophy, which makes the book feel so much more relatable and practical.
I completely agree. Housel advocates for a personalized approach to managing money, emphasizing that there's no one-size-fits-all strategy.
Right.
He's transparent about his family's decision to prioritize financial independence over chasing the highest possible returns, a choice they've made through strategies like paying off their mortgage early and maintaining a large cash buffer, which gives them a sense of security and peace of mind.
It's like he's saying, look, figure out what truly matters to you, what brings you a sense of security and fulfillment, and build your financial plan around those values, even if it means deviating from conventional wisdom or what everyone else is doing.
Exactly. And what I find fascinating is that he doesn't shy away from sharing his own investment strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Dollar cost averaging into low-cost index funds, which involves consistently investing a fixed amount of money at regular intervals, regardless of market fluctuations.
That's the classic set it and forget it approach, right?
Yes,
That takes the emotion out of investing, which can be a huge benefit, especially when the markets are volatile.
exactly. And while Housel acknowledges that this might not be the most exciting or glamorous approach, he believes it aligns with his family's goals and risk tolerance, providing a steady and reliable path to building wealth over the long term.
It's a refreshing dose of honesty and practicality in a world where financial advice can often feel like a sales pitch, where everyone is promising you the next big thing or the secret to getting rich quick.
You've hit the nail on the head. Housel's transparency and willingness to deviate from conventional wisdom encourage readers to think critically about their own financial priorities, to move beyond those simplistic narratives of get rich quick, and to develop a personalized approach that aligns with their unique values, goals, and risk tolerance.
That's such a powerful message. It's about taking ownership of your financial journey, not blindly following the crowd or chasing the latest fads.
And this leads us beautifully into the final section of the excerpts you've chosen, which takes us on a fascinating historical journey, exploring the evolution of the American consumer since World War II.
Okay, I'm ready to time travel.
Right.
Take us back to that pivotal moment in history.
All right, picture this. It's 1945.
Okay.
The war has just ended, and America is basking in the glow of victory. But beneath that surface of celebration lies a sense of uncertainty.
Hmm.
Millions of soldiers are returning home, factories need to shift from wartime production, and everyone is wondering what the future holds.
It's like standing at the edge of a new era, full of potential but also fraught with challenges.
Halsell paints a vivid picture of this pivotal moment. The economy is fragile, fears of a return to the Great Depression are lingering, and policymakers are grappling with the question of how to ensure a smooth transition to a peacetime economy.
It's a moment ripe for change.
Yes,
A moment where the decisions made would have ripple effects for generations to come.
and it's here that the story of the American consumer takes a fascinating turn. As Halsell explains, three key forces converge to shape the economic landscape. A surge in pent-up demand for goods and services after years of wartime rationing and scarcity.
Okay.
A surplus of savings accumulated during the war, and a government eager to stimulate economic growth.
So after years of sacrifice, people were ready to spend,
Yes,
and they had the means to do so.
exactly. And this sparked a consumption boom unlike anything seen before in American history.
It's like opening the floodgates after a long drought. I can almost hear the collective sigh of relief as people finally felt free to indulge in those long-deferred desires.
And this newfound consumer confidence was further fueled by the rise of consumer credit. New products like credit cards and installment plans made it easier than ever for people to buy now and pay later, spreading the cost of big-ticket items over time.
Buy now, pay later, a concept that would become deeply ingrained in American culture.
And this shift from a culture of thrift, which had been essential during the war years, to a culture of consumption was actively encouraged by policymakers and business leaders.
Wow.
As Halsell notes, spending was seen as a way to stimulate economic growth, create jobs, and maintain social stability.
So in a way, spending became patriotic.
In a sense, yes.
Yeah.
It was seen as a civic duty to support the economy by buying those new cars, appliances, and homes that were rolling off the assembly lines.
It's fascinating how our attitudes toward spending can be so heavily influenced by the social and economic context of the times.
Absolutely. And this new consumer-driven economy led to a period of remarkable economic expansion, with incomes rising across the board and a significant increase in the standard of living for many Americans.
So it was a rising tide that lifted all boats, at least for a while.
Precisely. And what's striking about this post-war boom is that the gains were shared more equally than ever before. The gap between the rich and the poor narrowed considerably, fostering a sense of optimism and social cohesion that felt genuinely unique to that era. The American dream seemed attainable for a broad swath of the population.
It sounds like a golden age,
Yeah?
a time of prosperity and opportunity.
In many ways, it was. But as Halsell points out, this economic and social landscape began to shift in the 1970s and 80s. A confluence of factors, including rising inflation, soaring oil prices, and increased global competition, began to erode those post-war economic advantages. The party couldn't last forever.
And as the economic winds shifted, did that sense of shared prosperity start to fray?
Unfortunately, yes. Growth became more uneven, and a gap began to widen between those whose incomes were rising and those who were left behind.
So that rising tide started to leave some people stranded on the shore.
And here's where things get really interesting. Halsell argues that despite this shift in economic reality, where the pie was no longer growing as rapidly or being divided as evenly, Americans clung to those post-war expectations of an egalitarian society where everyone should enjoy a similar lifestyle.
So even as the gap between the rich and the poor widened, people still aspired to live like their wealthier neighbors, even if it meant stretching their finances to the breaking point.
Exactly. And this led to what Halsell calls the big stretch. People increasingly relied on debt to finance a lifestyle they couldn't truly afford, fueled by easy credit and the constant pressure to keep up with the Joneses.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
You can force it, but eventually something has to give.
And as debt levels soared, both at the individual and national level, the stage was set for the financial crisis of 2008. The collapse of the housing bubble exposed the fragility of this debt-fueled system, leading to a painful reckoning that shook the foundations of the American economy.
It's like a house of cards finally collapsing under its own weight.
And in the aftermath of the crisis, while steps were taken to address some of the excesses that had led to the meltdown, Halsell suggests that the underlying paradigm of a consumption-driven economy remained largely intact.
So we're still living with the legacy of this historical journey, grappling with the consequences of decisions made decades ago.
Absolutely. And as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century economy, it's crucial to understand how we got here, the lessons we can learn from the past, and how those lessons can guide our financial choices today.
That's such a powerful insight. It's like looking in the rearview mirror to understand where we're headed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with that, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into the psychology of money.
We sure have. It's amazing how Housel can weave together personal anecdotes, historical examples, and psychological insights to create such a compelling narrative about the often overlooked human side of money.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I'm curious to hear what stood out to you the most from these excerpts.
What I find so fascinating is how Housel reminds us that while understanding the technical aspects of money is certainly important, it's mastering the psychology of money.
Yeah.
Understanding those often irrational forces that drive our financial decisions, that truly sets us up for success.
That's so true. We can have all the financial knowledge in the world, but if we don't understand our own biases, our emotional triggers, those deeply ingrained stories we tell ourselves about money, we're likely to make decisions that sabotage our long-term well-being.
Exactly. And one of the biggest takeaways for me is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to managing money. What matters most is finding an approach that aligns with your values, your goals, your risk tolerance, and yes, even your emotions.
It's about creating a financial plan that feels authentic to you,
Yes.
one that you can stick with through thick and thin.
And that reminds me of another important point that Housel makes.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
This journey of managing money is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be setbacks. There will be mistakes. But the key is to learn from them and keep moving forward.
And remember, if you ever find yourself questioning your choices or feeling overwhelmed by all the noise in the financial world, just think of Ronald Read, the janitor who quietly became a multimillionaire by consistently saving and investing, proving that slow, steady, and under the radar can sometimes be the most powerful approach of all.
That's such a great reminder. It's about focusing on the long game, on building those sustainable habits that will compound over time and lead to lasting financial well-being.